Hi everyone, Comic Book Reviewer here, this time reviewing on the first season of X-Men 97. Now as you know, X-Men 97 is basically a 2024 revival of X-Men the animated series that has been released now on Disney Plus. And the best way I can say about X-Men 97 is that, well, it is trying to be a revival of X-Men the animated series. It's clear it's trying to take some creative liberties and just putting things back onto the status quo that doesn't really need to be needed. And the best way I can sum it up is that it's good that it's bringing back the original cast members like Alison Shirley Smith, also Cole Dodd, also Rogue's voice actress Leonor San, and it is trying to do what it can with its concept. So the premise of the first season is meant to start off 1 year after Henry Gyrick's assassination attempt on Charles Xavier. We do kind of see how Scott Summers and the X-Men still try to lead the fight without Charles Xavier, and we are going to see that there are going to come a lot of unnecessary problems. There's going to come downfalls with the team, and there's going to come a lot of these problems that the X-Men don't really need. And I think for the most part, I give it credit showing how the series started off with Jubilee at the start of the first episode in the original series, having Roberto DaCosta, aka Sunspot, is an interesting idea. It starts off with him being the new Jubilee, and Jubilee being the one to guide him into this new idea for this better world. And I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think having, Morph being part of the team actually works a lot more. You can tell that they're trying to still be a bit of this kind of bundle of energy, but also know when to be the voice of reason when needed. But I think there is moments where I think a lot of these ideas come with a lot of consequences, like returning Magneto to being this kind of more angsty, more aggressive version. It did seem to suggest at the end of X-Men the animated series that Magneto would lead the school in his own way, but also would follow Charles' ideals. It's clear they were going this route, but it's more like trying to paint Magneto back to being this mustache-twirling villain again, and being this villain who wants to do the right things but gets easily misguided. And I think having him and Rogue in a relationship doesn't really seem to kind of make sense, and it seems to suggest that Rogue already knew Magneto when with Mystique, and this does cause some little bit of continuity errors. And they do also do the whole not really Jean Grey storyline when it's revealed that it's her clone all this time during the whole kind of aftermaths of the whole Dark Phoenix thing. And it seems like the ideas are going back and forward to where the continuities are meant to set, because one, the end of season 5 seemed to suggest that after everything that happened, it kind of left Magneto implying to be now leading the X-Men. It kind of showed Charles eventually having to accept that the X-Men would have to go on without him. But a lot of these decisions are just coming off as questionable, not really knowing where it wanted to be for the series, or just not knowing its true identity. And I think it's a shame that they just kind of revert everything back to its status quo, and it's a shame that we couldn't really see the X-Men carry on without Charles Xavier. It's a shame a lot of these personalities get butchered, and it's a shame that, it is trying to do something, but it's not knowing how to be respectful towards X-Men the animated series. And I think there's a reason why a lot of the time revivals tend to fail, because I think if something ends on a good note, or if it kind of feels concluded, there's no real reason to really continue it. I think the end of Futurama at the end of the last episode before its 2008 or 9 revival actually worked. It was just Fry playing on a sort of recorder, visualizing what a life he does want with Leela. That felt rewarding. Or it's kind of like looking at Shaolin Showdown. You got a sense the monks would go on other adventures we never get to see. But when there's a unnecessary revival, it's just reverting things back to status quo that doesn't really need to be needed. And I think the worst offender was Shaolin Chronicles because it felt out of place. You didn't really understood if it was a continuation or a reboot. And I think the problem with X-Men 97 is it's trying to go too much back on its older roots. And I think having near the end the X-Men going back to the more older uniforms just kind of gives that sense of trying to go a bit too nostalgic badass, which isn't bad, but I can see where X-Men Evolution and even Wolverine and the X-Men took some creative liberties with some of the uniforms, and that's not a bad idea. It showed they were being a bit more creative than going too colourful with some of the uniforms. And I think there's moments where you can tell as well, I think, that the show doesn't really know how to work with its characters because it seems to kind of put Wolverine back to being this bit of this cold, distant grump with Jean and Scott Summers, but we already seen that Wolverine had moved past that and accepted it, and it kind of even put Scott Summers a bit too much on this cold, distant level. At least with X-Men the animated series, it did put Scott as a bit of this non-nonsense leader. You got this sense he still wanted to believe that Xavier could do the right things. But I think the problem is X-Men 97 doesn't really know its true identity. It doesn't really know if it wants to continue after season 5 or be something completely different. And there's moments where it does feel characters feel out of place. It doesn't know its true identity, and a lot of the time the writing comes off as questionable, not knowing its identity, and does kind of putting characters back into things that don't really need to be needed. My best thoughts about the first season of X-Men 97, it's a first season that's trying to go too much back on its older roots and not really respecting X-Men the animated series. I give it credit with the opening that it is going back on a bit on nostalgia. I give it credit that it is changing the character roster and doing something interesting. But there's a lot of decisions that got made that did not need to be made. So I think this season definitely deserves a thumbs down. Not interesting, not great, just a butchered revival that kind of shows what can happen when you revive a show that doesn't really need to be revived. And a lot of the time, revivals are and always will fail when it's given to wrong people or in the wrong hands and butchers what originally ended on a good and positive note. So, comic book reviewer here, signing out.